Imagine a world where Marcus Phoenix wasn't built like an absolute brick shithouse. Or perhaps a world where Kratos doesn't have his ultra sick and iconic red swirly line of a tattoo. No, that's okay. That's alright. I don't want to either. The design of a video game character is incredibly important. It helps our heroes and villains stand out in our minds, becoming immortalized as gaming icons. And honestly, the design of a main character could really make or break a franchise and its popularity. That's why so much care goes into the conceptual process of creating a main character from scratch. And not only that, but the worlds our characters are inhabiting too. But what about the generic, low-level mobs and enemy types we commonly see throughout so many video games? Are their designs just as important as our main protagonists? I'd argue it definitely is. When building a world, the lore and backstory is just as important for the generic mobs and NPCs as it is for our main character. Their size, appearance, motivations, basically everything needs to make contextual sense if a game developer is wanting to create a bulletproof and immersive world. So that got me thinking, why do grunts in video games look the way they do? Or more specifically, why do grunts from Halo look like that? Disregarding our favourite green Spartan, Masterchief, and my first childhood crush Cortana, there's just so much iconic imagery seen throughout the entirety of the Halo series. And the Unggoy, otherwise known as the Grunts, are no exception. Introduced in Halo Combat Evolved as this cutesy, comic relief fodder for players to slaughter, their hilarious lines and clever AI make the Grunts an absolute standout from the rest of the Covenant. But are Grunts solely designed the way they are for levity and comic relief? Well, to explore that, let's first take a quick look at their lore and backstory in the Halo universe. So, the Grunts are native to this methane-choked ice world of Balaho, and they evolved in this incredibly hostile, low-oxygen environment that forced them to become tough, communal, and incredibly adaptable. They're survivors. That's why they wear those bulky methane tanks in the game. They literally can't breathe out air. Their squat, triangular bodies, oversized limbs, and recessed eyes aren't just for show either. These features are adapted to conserve heat, survive toxic weather, and function in dense, high-pressure atmospheres. Eventually, the atmosphere on the Grunts' homeworld became so unstable and damaged by industrialization, leading to an ecological crisis. This led to the Grunts' desperate fight for survival, which is why they were willing to join the Covenant in the first place upon their arrival. In the Covenant, the Grunts were basically treated like shit. Just disposable infantry or slave soldiers sent to the meat grinder by higher ranked elites and prophets. But behind the scenes, they're one of the only species in Halo lore to ever rebel against the Covenant in an uprising so fierce it nearly tore the Alliance apart. Some could even say that the hierarchy of power in the Covenant was about to change, but that's also a whole other story. Despite their violent and tragic history, and somewhat creepy design upon a closer look, the Grunts remain strangely lovable, which I think is mostly thanks to their high-pitched voices, clumsy panic, and weird mix of bravery and cowardice. When doing research for this video, I tried to find the earliest designs and concept art for the Grunts, but it's kind of hard to pinpoint the chronological order for some of these images. For example, there's this image from Bungie.net that shows 5 different iterations of the Grunt design from artist Shikai Wang back in 1999. Now, I could be completely wrong with my assumption here, but I've put a number next to each version of what I'm assuming is the chronological order of design. At least to me, this looks like the natural progression and evolution of the Grunt anyway. First of all, what the hell is this thing?
Holy God, what are you showing me? His head. Come on! Open your eyes!
Its initial design kind of looks like that gross human/alien xenomorph thingy, which then progresses towards the last design shown here, which is much closer to what we're all familiar with today. Then, in this picture, you can see a much closer look at some of the early concepts for the Grunt's design, which at this point still doesn't have the whole methane breathing tank contraption yet, but to be fair, so far we've only really seen concepts for Grunts without their armor. But with saying that, in this picture, we can actually see a much closer rendition of the Grunt design with armor equipped, which is very similar to what we see in the Halo games. One version of the Grunt appears to have the standard armor plating on its back, with the other seemingly carrying what I'm assuming is a larger methane tank. Not sure if this would be solely for its own personal use, or whether the intention behind this Grunt design is to carry a large amount of methane for other Grunts to access as well, but this concept art is just really cool and striking nonetheless. Another really cool piece of concept art that I wanted to highlight here is the image of a flood-infected Grunt. I don't believe we get to see any infected Grunts in the mainline Halo entries, but apparently they were included in Halo Wars 1, which is really cool. Just seeing the spindly looking spores poking out of its body and its head literally twisted upside down, it's truly unsettling and feels a lot more like something we'd see if the Halo universe crossed paths with The Last of Us. I found another iteration of early concepts for the Grunt taken from a page in the book, The Art of Halo, Creating a Virtual World. And this one actually describes this design as being one of the first iterations of the Grunt. Here we can see an armoured version and a straight up naked version of the Grunt, with both renditions being much more detailed than any of the other images we've sifted through so far. But what's interesting about this page is that it also highlights the hierarchy system that the Grunts follow. Similar to the elites, the Grunts display their status by the colour of their armour, with silver armour denoting the highest rank amongst themselves, and armour being clad in orange showing the lowest ranking Grunts. This appears to be fairly consistent across the entirety of the Halo series, but what hasn't remained consistent is the actual Grunt designs from different Halo games. In the original game, Halo Combat Evolved, Grunts were squat, triangle-shaped little guys with waddling animations, rigid armor plates, and of course, the iconic methane tank strapped to their backs. Their design was simple, almost toy-like, but it worked. Bungie also leaned into the humour element of their design, with high-pitched screams and their clumsy, panicked AI that gave the Covenant's weakest soldier a shit ton of personality. But over time, the Grunts received a visual glow-up. In Halo 2, they became sleeker with more detailed armour and expressive animations. And by the time Halo 3 came around, the series had gone HD, with Grunts receiving more individual armour variations for rank, and their movements became much more fluid and dynamic than before. Halo Reach seemingly took a darker turn, with Grunts looking tougher, more alien, with segmented armour, and with even more variety overall. But it's when we get to Halo 4 and 5 that things really start to change. With the series now under 343 Industries, the Grunts had been radically redesigned. They appeared almost more insect-like, with more of a high-tech aesthetic. Think skinnier limbs with more angular armour, and almost crab-like faces. Weirdly enough, I feel like their design in the newer games almost regressed backwards to appear more like the initial concepts that we explored earlier on in this video. But with that being said, say what you want about Halo Infinite, it did manage to bring things back full circle when it came to its design. The Grunts here are chunkier again, with bulkier gear, and having a more comedic flair. They feel like a blend of Combat Evolved's goofy charm and Reach's mechanical detail, but let's say less creepy, more cartoonishly dangerous. Of course, everyone's going to have their personal favourites, but as for myself, I think that Bungie absolutely nailed the Grunt aesthetic right from the jump, and somewhat managed to only improve upon the initial designs over and over again, all up until Halo was handed over to 343. But just taking a quick step back for now, so far in this video we've explored the lore and the backstory of the Grunts, as well as the evolution of their design from early concept art to how their aesthetic had changed from game to game. But how does all this information tell us why they look the way they do? Well, Bungie's Damien Eiler spoke at GDC 2005 and Develop Brighton 2008, where he talked about Bungie's 30 seconds of fun, model and design mentality. In short, it's the idea of creating an airtight gameplay loop and being able to build a whole game around it, from the level design to the enemy AI. But more specifically, at the GDC conference in 2005, he provided a number of examples which highlighted the sophisticated nature of the Grunt's AI and behaviour in Halo 2. One example Damien goes through is a scenario where he's shooting at a Grunt with a machine gun and the Grunt is shooting back. So then he pulls out an energy sword and the Grunt immediately turns around and flees and searches for safety. The Grunts aren't put into these games to pose as a threat to the player, but are more there to play a role of just sheer cannon fodder, or in other words, being the Grunt soldiers of the Covenant. They're crafted to serve as the primary low-level adversaries, introducing players to combat mechanics without overwhelming them. Their predictable behaviour and vulnerabilities allow players to grasp core gameplay elements early on. And I believe that this approach aligns with the whole 30 seconds of fun mantra, with emphasising the short and engaging combat loops. They're designed to be weaker and more cowardly, and to flee as soon as the chief either pops out a heavy weapon or happens to take out one of the Covenant leaders. It's because of this behaviour and cowardice as to why they're considered the bottom of the food chain in the Covenant alliance. Prominent features such as their methane tanks and combat stature not only reflects the species' backstory, but also makes them stand out on the battlefield. This design ensures that players can quickly identify and target them in combat situations. But speaking on more of a lighthearted note, Grunts also have some really innovative AI behaviours, leading to some hilarious in-game moments. Whether a grunt is fleeing the scene or is chasing you around with 2 sticky grenades ready to blow at any given moment, they fulfill this role of creating levity, while also providing the player with this power fantasy experience in between facing more challenging enemies like the elites or hunters. Of course, like with anything, the grunt design is only made better with knowing their lore and backstory, but in the end, these little guys are designed to be totally non-threatening, oozing with personality, and they aren't to be taken too seriously, which is the overall reason why I think that grunts look the way they do.